All right, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the my presentation here, entitled "Passing Through." And today we'll be talking about the disappearance of Schenectady's free Black population. Um, and by the way, my name is Mike Diane, and nice to meet you all. I don't know if you've ever been down to the Schenectady County Historical Society, but we have a couple of historic sites in Schenectady County. So you're always welcome to come and check us out here. And this is a bit of a newer presentation. In fact, really still doing the research here. This is an ongoing project that I've been more or less working on for about a year now. So it's a lot. But I just want to share what I've found so far with you guys. And again, so the disappearance of Schenectady's free Black population, what does that mean? What is this about? Well, first of all, let's just kind of back up a little bit. And this is a problem that I kind of first became aware of when I first started working at the Historical Society, and only became more and more aware of it as, well, time went on, right? And that's a matter of historical invisibility. Now, what the heck does that mean? It means that even though, people of color have been living in Schenectady since quite literally the beginning, there's really very little to recognize them anywhere in the kind of the architecture or in the monuments that you'll see in Schenectady today. Now, recently there's a kind of a big hullabaloo about this statue here put out. This is the public library, the Schenectady City Library here. And it's quite a nice statue, but this is the only depiction of an African-American person in Schenectady at all. And of course, this is Harriet Tubman here. Now, you might be aware that Harriet Tubman is not from Schenectady. In fact, to my knowledge, I don't think she's really ever spent much time in Schenectady at all. So, while she's certainly a cool lady and worth learning about, and, sitting next to her is William Seward over there, and he actually did go to school in Schenectady, so at least there's a kind of a local connection for this guy here. There really is no local connection for this woman here, Harriet. And I think that's kind of strange. I think that, there's so many characters, there's so many people to choose from once you do the research, that I feel like there could have been perhaps another subject for this kind of treatment here in our own town. Like when you go throughout the Stockade Historic District, for instance, you'll see all these little plaques here, there, and everywhere. And the plaques are supposed to tell you something about the house or something that was there, right? And unfortunately, there's really only one plaque that speaks to a free Black family or a Black family of any description at all. And that's going to be this one right here. You can kind of just see it here on if you can see my mouse. Dave, can you see my mouse?
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, so that is supposed to designate where the Speck House is, the Simon Speck House, which has been appended to this larger Van Slyke house over here. And the Specks were a free family. They didn't start off that way. They were enslaved when they came to Schenectady. And I think around the middle of the 18th century, maybe later, they became free. Somehow, we're not entirely sure, but it seems that they got their freedom. And so this plaque was here to kind of acknowledge the fact that this is the only house belonging to a free Black family, or any free Black family that we can see in the stockade in the 18th century. And there they are. So between the monuments and the plaques and even the histories, now obviously I don't have the time to do a full kind of literature review of all Schenectady history, but take my word for it, whether it's Larry Hart or Jonathan Pearson or whoever it is, the big names in Schenectady history, no one is talking about these people of color. Basically, the story is, as best as you can find it in the record, in the historical kind of literature, is that Black people were slaves and then they weren't, and then fast forward 200 years and Barack Obama becomes president, which sounds very silly, and I'm purposefully making it silly. But yeah, that's basically what the story is in Schenectady. and there's certainly more to it than that. So new research is necessary, and that's the long and short of it. And I've been trying to conduct some of this research myself. What does that look like? What does that look like? What have I been doing? Well, I've been trying to document as many people as I can. Well, what that looks like, it's sometimes isn't pretty. Here, let me see if you can follow me on this journey here. I've been pouring through every census record through the 19th century. Maybe you guys are familiar with census research, but here's a census from the 1820s. Can you guys see Dave, can you see the census here?
Yeah, it's a little hard to read, but we can see that.
Well, it's a little hard to read in the best of times, right? Even if you were right here with me, it'd be a little bit hard to read. So yes, so we have this census record, and certainly, many others for every decade in the 19th century. And basically, I've gone through, and some volunteers started helping me out because this is not just a one-man job. And basically, we've been looking for every Black Schenectadian that we can find. And then for each decade, we created a spreadsheet that looks something like this. Can you guys see this spreadsheet here? A lot cleaner data here. A lot cleaner data. And this is, to document all of these people. And you can see that from 1820 to, let's see here, 1830, the format changes quite a bit. Here we have, let's take a look at 1900 here. 1900 starts looking really different. Oh boy, look at all this. This is sometimes a little bit overwhelming. It gives you a lot of information, but man, this one was probably the hardest to go through, just because it's just so much information. And well, we turned that into a spreadsheet as well. So now we have these lists. Again, every decade through the 19th century, we have every single Black Schenectadian on a list that we can identify. And that at least does something for us. It provides us with a research aid, right? Because this is so much more clear and concise than anything you're going to find here or here for that matter. And this is a really great place to begin our research. And the first thing that you see when you kind of start this project, the first thing, if I go back to my slideshow here, is this very peculiar trend through the century. And here I'm going to give you the population in 1820. There were 520 Black Schenectadians in 1820. Of those, 88 are still enslaved. So about 440, 440, that's how math works, free people, and then 88 enslaved. And that's the highest point, that's the highest level of this population at probably until, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say 1960. Because by the end of the century, there's only 165 Black Schenectadians left. And of those 165, 60 are not even native to New York. So maybe 105 who are from New York, not even necessarily still from Schenectady. These other 60 are coming in from other places around the country, a lot of southern states, Virginia, Georgia, again, that deep South, where in 1900, they would be facing some pretty severe discrimination. Not that, Schenectady was a post-racial utopia in 1900, but it was perhaps a little bit better than random town in Mississippi or South Carolina. And this trend, this says something to me, right? Not only is the population as a relative to the whole population going down, the absolute population is going down from 520 to 165. That suggests pretty heavily that these people who were freed in and around 1820, for whatever reason, they, or maybe their next descendant or the descendant after that, found a reason that they needed to leave or to pass on through Schenectady for greener pastures elsewhere. And really, that's what we're going to be looking for at here today. What accounts for this dramatic decrease in the population? Well, it's not an easy question to answer, and I don't know if I have the full context or the full contours of the answer. but I can give you some findings that I have right here. And the first thing that I'm going to hit you with is that, so, 1827, the final legal end of slavery in New York State, you would have all these people here, these 520 people, would have their freedom, but perhaps not much more than that. Perhaps the clothes on their backs, perhaps maybe a little bit in terms of an informal education, but maybe not even that. It was really completely dependent upon their former masters to decide what they would and wouldn't take into their newly freed lives. But what they almost never had was large amounts of money or land. And of course, those large amounts of money would be good for purchasing land. A lot of these people were agricultural workers their entire lives, and it's not very helpful to have all this agricultural knowledge if you don't have land of your own to work on. So what you see is that when you go through the records, unfortunately, very, very few of these people become property owners. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of the property has been bought up. Like already in Schenectady by 1820, all the common lands had more or less been auctioned off. And if you don't have copious amounts of money, it's very hard to buy your way onto a more established farm. It's not to say that it didn't happen. There's one family, at least, the Murray family. Simon Murray is the first one I could identify there, who was able to start up his own farm in Glenville and kind of live the dream, kind of be his own man, and his family worked and lived on that land for a generation and a half. So again, I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying that it's very difficult kind of starting where these folks had to start. Another kind of unfortunate thing that you see, again, through the data is the trades are not open to these people. Because I've gone through, when you start to get into like the 1850s, the 1860s, the 1870s, they start to list specific occupations in the federal census, which is great. It's, very helpful to me as a researcher. In our case, however, for these people, I'm not exaggerating here. I would say 99 times out of 100, the occupation listed for a black man at this time is just laborer, just generic laborer, and that's all it is. There are some exceptions we'll talk about, but laborer is the overwhelming majority of cases. Now, again, when you kind of think about the context, what else could we be talking about? There's no blacksmiths, there's no coopers, there's no tinsmiths or any other kind of smith for that matter. No cobblers, no one else listed. And what this suggests very strongly to me is that these people are not being, in order to become a tradesperson, you have to find someone to be an apprentice to. And these people were unable to find anyone to take them under their wing, so to speak, and show them the trade. Lastly, let's talk about education, because education was another thing that was not open to these people. So again, mostly farm work. Maybe you could transition into another way of life if only you had a proper education. But the public schools were closed to black students through the middle of the 19th century, meaning that these young kids, if they wanted an education, there was a way for them. But typically what they had to do, or what their parents had to do, would be to bind out their children as servants for wealthier, almost certainly white families living out in the country. Like there's a very interesting lady named Julia A.J. Foote, who was born in Schenectady, who grew up here. She would go on to be a very committed evangelical and the first female deacon in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. But she grew up in Schenectady, and she recalls precisely that thing. Her parents couldn't afford to send her to school. There were no public schools open for her, so her parents sent her to live with a family out in Rotterdam. And it was all good for a period of time until one of the other servant boys at this family stole a cake and ate the cake. And the lady of the house assumed that it was Julia who ate the cake. And when she said that it wasn't her, she protested her innocence, she was beaten for not telling the truth, apparently. And she remembers that being a very dark, dark day in her life. And as a very religious woman, everything she writes in her memoirs is in very apocalyptic terms, even this cake stealing incident. But I imagine there was no small amount of hardship there, again, being a young girl in a stranger's house, basically. So that's, again, kind of how the cards are being stacked against these people. Nevertheless, we do have a community of free Black Schenectadians, which really kind of coalesces right here. Can you guys see this? Can you guys see my mouse here? Basically, this is called Fonda Street back in the day. Today, we might know it as Upper J Street. And this area, kind of where it intersects with, there's a, well, it's not, there it is, Pine Street right here. So this upper area would be kind of the nucleus of the kind of, I guess you would say, the property to the most successful Black Schenectadians in the time period that we're researching here. And unfortunately, if you go there today, you're not going to find anything to remember this by. You're going to find this. You know, obviously this is not the best photography in the world, but if you go there for yourself, it's not going to look any better. This whole area has been pulled up, turned upside down. And if people know it as anything, they know it as Little Italy. They did this whole kind of initiative with to turn this into a little Italian district in 2004. The history there is kind of dubious. I don't really associate this area with the Italian immigrants that came to Schenectady in the later part of the 19th century. But nevertheless, that's what they did to it. So they put the train tracks through here, and then eventually, I don't want to kind of spoil it here, but up here would be the beginning of the Schenectady Locomotive Works. And as this locomotive works expands and grows, it would push into this little community here and gradually displace them. And again, this locomotive works is not hiring any of these people. It won't do it, or at least it didn't do it. There's not a single person that I could find working at the locomotive works. People could come from Poland, people could come from Italy, people could come from around the world and work at this locomotive works. And it was a big deal in its time. But you could not come from down the street if you were Black in Schenectady and work at this locomotive works. And I'm going to assert that as, well, that's just borne out by the evidence that it has not happened in this entire century. And nevertheless. So there's one community here. There's a slightly smaller community here on Barrett Street. And basically what you're seeing is these people are living on the outskirts of town, whether it's this Pine and Fonda Street intersection or it's this Barrett Street intersection, because this is the old stockade. This is the older, kind of more settled, established families living here. When you get kind of out here into the suburbs as they were at the time, this is all super inner city today, but you know, the suburbs that they were at the time, it starts to make more sense that land would be available here and not in here where the well-to-do old Schenectady names have been living since 1661. So what does it look like? Again, these people that we can identify as property owners, what kind of separates them out? Well, one thing that I can tell you is if there was a prestige job for a Black person in Schenectady, if there was kind of one way to rise above the rest, it was in the industry of being a barber, of hairdressing, right? And the most prominent people that we can identify from this community are barbers. Kind of the rationale there is that a barber does not need any formal apprenticeship. A barber does not need any formal schooling. And the capital that it takes to invest in a barber shop, I mean, really, you need some scissors, probably some shaving cream. I'm sure it's not easy, folks, but it's perhaps less capital intensive than starting your own shoe shop or something like that, right? So we have a number of people that we can talk about, whether it's John Wendell or it's Richard P.G. Wright or Francis Dana, who were probably the most recognizable Black men in town. And they would even, be advertising their services in the Schenectady Directory, which is it's a publication primarily for the white population in Schenectady. And I know that because whether it's the directory from 1840 or the one from the 1860s, the number of Black Schenectadians listed in the directories is always like 1/10 of the actual population, which is to say the people who are compiling the directory are not or feel that it's not necessary to provide an exhaustive list of the Black population in Schenectady, because there's only so many that they reckon their subscribers are going to need to know. People like Richard P.G. Wright, people like John Wendell, but other than that, it's not a big deal in their eyes, right? In their eyes. Excuse me. So as the century progresses, things don't really change all that much. And I do imagine this would be the kind of environment which people would want to move on, move away. And what would be the mechanisms by which this would happen? Well, there's one mechanism I can talk about in some detail, and that's this lovely Orwellian organization known as the Overseers of the Poor. Now, Schenectady is not the only town to have Overseers of the Poor. It was actually a pretty common institution back in the day. It was a way for the town to basically provide for people who could not provide for themselves. And it was certainly considered and seen as a charitable organization back in the day. We might not see it as so charitable now, but that's a difference of 150 years. And the Overseers of the Poor, they had a farm up here, kind of, again, on the outskirts of town, where any pauper, anyone so defined legally as a pauper who could not take care of themselves, if there was room on this farm, you and your family could go and work and live on this farm. But there was only so much room on that farm, right? And so another thing that the Overseers of the Poor would do is that they would hire out children of impoverished, again, as they would describe, pauper families, to other families who apparently could take care of these kids better. And that seems to happen quite a bit for Black children at this time. We have a couple of documents in our own collection of these indentures where young Black children, and they're identified as such, they're conspicuously identified as such, are being sent to Amsterdam. In one case, it was a brother and a sister, and we have two separate documents for these two brothers and sisters. And unfortunately for them, they're not going to the same place. They're going to different farms in Amsterdam. And typically the conditions of these agreements are that the foster family doesn't even, the sponsor family, I'm not even really sure what the appropriate word here is. The kids would work for the family as long as they could until they became of age, and then they would be sent on their way, theoretically, with 2 suits of clothing and an education. It's hard to say if that ever came true, because unfortunately, when we try to find these kids, we haven't had much luck. We haven't been able to find them or figure out what has happened to them after their indenture is up. But it's kind of interesting to think that, in the 1830s and the 1840s, in the 1850s, long after slavery is abolished in Schenectady, you still have these institutions whereby, Black children could be sent one way or the other to go work for someone else. Now, to be fair, to give the proper context, this could happen to white kids too. This was, not specifically an institution targeting Black children. It's just something that I think disproportionately affected them, again, given where these people are starting from, starting new free lives with no resources to their name, no resources to their credit. It would be something that would affect them quite a bit. Now, again, as the century does progress, you do start to see an influx of people coming in from the South, which I think is very interesting. This is happening as early as 1870 and 1860 even. I didn't mean to do that. And it's very interesting that they're coming to Schenectady, of all places, from places like the Deep South, because this is typically before what we commonly understand to be the Great Migration. And this is something that I don't know much about yet, but I do wonder, as these people came into Schenectady, they wouldn't be living in the established communities that had been here for the native Schenectady Black residents. They typically would be living here in these more kind of hoity-toity districts of Schenectady. And that's not because they're coming in with loads of cash from South Carolina. No, these people are probably escaping some very difficult circumstances. These people are typically coming in as domestic servants. And you see them in the census occupying some, household here, where obviously they're working for someone else. And typically by the next census, by the next decade, those people are gone. So you do start to see a little kind of a smattering of people in this area, but never for very long. And they would typically be moving on very, very quickly. And I do wonder, again, because it's kind of silly and to treat all Black people in Schenectady or in the country as monolithic. That's silly. And I do wonder, what the relationship between the native Schenectadians and these folks from down south, if it was a cordial one, if they kind of recognized how, they were kind of face common discrimination or not, it's really hard to say. So I talked about the locomotive works. The General Electric works here on the south side of the city, well, technically over here, would kind of exhibit a similar trend, a similar phenomenon. Even though you have the Edison Machine Works established in the 1880s and reincorporated as the General Electric Company just a decade later, you have this incredible growth down here. But again, this large factory, this industrial dynamo, whatever you want to call it, is also not hiring Black people. They just aren't. Not until really the 1830s. You don't get anyone listed as a GE employee. And like I said, I've gone through the decades, I've gone through the data, and you don't see anyone listed. And that would be another kind of limitation and another kind of push for these people to leave Schenectady. Because if the largest two factories in town aren't going to hire you, there's probably not too much that you can do here at all. And it really does raise the question, and this is where my research is going to take me next. Like, where the heck are these people going? Do they just scatter to the winds? Do they just pick is there a certain community in upstate New York west of here that they're going to? Well, I guess anything is possible. I heard one kind of wild story about an enslaved person who apparently lived here at the Maybe Farm. That's where I am right now at our visitor center at the Maybe Farm, who apparently became a Buffalo Soldier. And if you're not familiar with the Buffalo Soldiers, it was an all-Black regiment that went out west and fought Indians on behalf of the federal government. And I heard this story. I really got to look into it because that would be incredible if it's true. Of course, it's going to be a difficult thing to track down. So unfortunately, I don't have too many more answers here for you. I just have a brief sketch of this community. But for me, again, locating these people in place and time might not seem like much, but for me, it felt like a big accomplishment because prior to that, again, we don't even have this most basic information. And as I go through all of these spreadsheets that I now have, again, this is the 1810 one. Here we have, what is this? This is, I've got 1840, 1820, 1830, 1790, 1860. Our understanding is only going to improve from here. But yeah, I look forward to more of what this is going to uncover. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you very much. If anybody that's tuning in has some questions, put them in the chat bubble and we'll ask them Mike and from there. I had a few things that I was kind of making note of along the way here. And then as I continued to listen to your presentation, you pretty much answered most of them. So that was good. Although I am pretty excited, and what this does is it just sparks this additional amount of interest in where the research is going to take you and if there is at this point any sort of determination of what the end result is. I imagine this research could continue for many years, but are you hoping to put this in a form of an exhibit, or are you putting this into not just other presentations, something, and maybe connecting with a larger initiative, maybe at a state level or national level, to kind of put that research and data out there?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, the sky's the limit for this. Our next project, you know, uh, maybe contrived. I don't know. We got this grant funding from the Museum Association of New York. It's a kind of like a digital initiatives funding, and as part of that, we wanted to take all this research and turn it into a little bit of a documentary. And we're still working on that right now. The due date is at the end of next month, so I better keep working on it. But that's kind of the next project that I want to make. Again, try to bring some kind of visual component to this, because that's really where we start from. We start from a position where all of this stuff is completely invisible. And we want to rectify that as best as we can, so that people might be able to walk through Schenectady and recognize that there was a community of free Black people living here, even though nothing else would suggest so.
And on those census forms, you mentioned just a lot of Black Schenectadians are generally just as labor. There's no other indication as to if they were labored, say, along the railroad as freight handlers, or on the canal, or just farms.
Yes, sometimes you get a more specific answer. Sometimes you get like laborer, and then in parentheses, kind of like coal hauler or something like that. But typically, I mean, if I just pull it up right here, let's take a look here. Yeah, so this is 1900, right? So we've got barber, day laborer, servant, day laborer, barber. She's a dressmaker. That's kind of cool. Wrestler. That's kind of cool. Laundry. He's a minister. That's kind of cool. But yeah, basically it's just a very vague kind of description of what you might call a menial position, right? Housemaid, house servant, day laborer. Oh, he's a mason. That's kind of cool. That's a little bit different. Farm laborer. So
yeah. What I'm also noticing on there, some of the interest is people being listed as renting. Maybe they're not kind of listed as a few that own or are mortgaging, and those are the ones typically what you identified on here as a more skilled job. There were some barbers, the laborer that was listed as a mason, having the ability to make enough of a wage to mortgage a house in some way. So I imagine that also leads to a lot of the other is discriminatory, between the education and the opportunity, but also with finances as well. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like here, we've got this guy, Moses Viney. He's kind of famous, right? Because there's this whole story about him. It's got this kind of positive arc towards the end. The Act 1 and Act 2 of the story is not terribly fun because he's born on a Maryland plantation, and he escapes that plantation. He goes all around the Northeast. He finds his way to Schenectady. Starts working for Eliphalet Knott, the president of Union College, for like actually 60 years. And Eliphalet Knott takes a liking to Moses Viney, and he purchases his freedom. It's this whole story. And then when Knott dies, he gives Moses Viney a bunch of money. So Moses Viney was able to, own his own house, start his own business at the end of his life. He worked until he was 93 years old as you can see here, a teamster. But Moses Viney had what you might say a kind of a wealthy patron, one of the wealthiest guys in town, to give him the startup capital. Perhaps not everyone was quite so wealthy as Moses, or quite so lucky as Moses Viney ended up being in this case.
Absolutely. So could you just tell us a little bit more about what is upcoming in the next few months so far as the Schenectady County Historical Society, some events and programs you might have lined up, and then share your contact information maybe, and so those who might want to reach out can?
Yeah, sure. So at the Historical Society, this time of the year is typically kayaking season. We've got a couple more kayak tours planned, and there's still some room on those. If you guys want to take a little ride out on the Mohawk River with us, we do kayak tours in Schenectady, as we have done for a couple years. And now this year we're doing them in Waterford, which is kind of cool. So you can find that all on our website. We have one more kids program on September 1st, and that's where the the farm will be open for kids, predominantly kids. Parents should come too, but mostly kids. And we do just general colonial activities for the kids. It's a lot of fun. Let's see here. Going into kind of school season. Well, I gotta say, I just really hope the school season. I hope we get some school kids coming back. I don't really know what to expect for this 21-22 school year, but I do hope we can start seeing kids again, because that's a large part of my job that I have not been able to do for the last 2 years.
Yeah, I can completely understand and relate to that.
Yeah.
Been a strange, quiet couple of seasons here. So
yeah, that's for sure. If you guys would like to contact me, I see a couple of comments in the chat here. I'll just you can excuse me. You can email me at this address here.
Well, Mike's thinking in there. There was a comment that came in from Gina about since there was a couple of those children that were let out to be from the overseers of the fort to separate farms in Amsterdam. Is there any work with Kelly Farquhar over at Montgomery County Department of History and Archives?
Well, yeah, that's something I really ought to do. I'm gonna write that name down, Kelly, because I don't think I've worked with Kelly before, but that would be the next logical step.
And I'll send you some information if you don't already have her contact there. But I really appreciate your time today for Lunchbox Lesson number 5, and this kind of concludes our Strange Bizarre Noontime Summer program series. So my eyes, this is a good way to kind of bring that to an end. And my apologies that there was some technical problems and everything. I'm glad that you were able to get back on there in a different place and a different way. And I know that it's not easy to kind of reformat your situation, and then to have to do that from the front desk at the visitor center with everything else going on there. I really do appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for those that have joined in. Michael, Diana, it's great research. Really looking forward to hearing more as you uncover more, and keep up the great work. Wonderful programs that you guys have over there. Great research being done. It's tremendous, and just keep it up. It's awesome.
David. All right, I guess I'll sign off now. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope to see you here in the not too distant future.
Thank you all, and be well.